For most of human history, the Arctic was the end of the world. A vast frozen ocean surrounded by some of the most hostile environments on the planet. Temperatures could drop below -40 degrees, storms could last for days, and the sea itself was locked under massive sheets of ice. For centuries, no ships could cross it, no trade routes passed through it, and no country had much reason to fight over it. But today, something extraordinary is happening at the top of the planet. The ice is melting. And as the Arctic begins to open, the world's most powerful nations are quietly moving in. Russia, the United States, Canada, Norway, even China, all racing toward the same frozen frontier. Because beneath the Arctic ice lies something incredibly valuable. Resources, shipping routes, and possibly the next great geopolitical battleground. So the question is, why are some of the most powerful countries in the world suddenly competing for control of the Arctic? Why are new military bases being built in one of the harshest environments on Earth? Why are cargo ships preparing to sail through waters that were once completely frozen? And why do some experts believe the Arctic could become one of the most important strategic regions of the 21st century? To understand why the Arctic is suddenly so important, we need to start with a simple question. What exactly is the Arctic? And why, for most of history, did almost nobody care about it? The Arctic sits at the very top of the planet. Unlike Antarctica, which is a continent covered in ice, the Arctic is mostly an ocean covered by a floating layer of sea ice. This frozen ocean is surrounded by several countries that lie within what is known as the Arctic Circle. Russia, Canada, the United States through Alaska, Norway, and Denmark through Greenland. These countries form what is sometimes called the Arctic Five, the nations with direct access to the Arctic Ocean. Because of their geography, they hold the strongest territorial claims to the region. But for centuries, that geography didn't matter very much, because the Arctic was simply too difficult to use. For most of recorded history, the Arctic Ocean was covered by thick sea ice. In many places, that ice was several meters deep. Ships could not pass through it. Trade routes could not cross it. Even exploration was extremely dangerous. Some expeditions became trapped in ice for months. Others disappeared entirely. The Arctic wasn't seen as an opportunity. It was seen as a barrier. A frozen wall at the top of the world that separated continents and blocked any attempt to cross it. For centuries, the Arctic remained one of the least important regions on Earth. But over the last few decades, something began to change. Something that is now transforming the entire region. The ice is disappearing. Over the past few decades, scientists have observed something remarkable happening in the Arctic. The sea ice is shrinking. Satellite images show that the Arctic has been losing ice at an alarming rate. In fact, the region is warming almost 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. Each summer, more ice melts than the year before, and the ice that remains is thinner and more fragile than it used to be. Where thick, multi-year ice once dominated the Arctic Ocean, large areas are now covered by seasonal ice that disappears completely during warmer months. For the first time in human history, parts of the Arctic Ocean are becoming navigable. Water that was once permanently frozen is now opening into new passages. And that changes everything. Because when the ice disappears, it reveals what lies beneath it. Beneath the Arctic Ocean lies something the modern world desperately needs: energy. According to estimates from the United States Geological Survey, the Arctic could contain enormous reserves of oil and natural gas. In fact, some researchers believe the region may hold about 13% of the world's undiscovered oil, and nearly 30% of its undiscovered natural gas. These resources have been locked under the ice for thousands of years, too difficult and too expensive to extract. But as the Arctic becomes more accessible, those resources suddenly become far more attractive. For energy-hungry economies, the Arctic is starting to look less like a frozen wasteland and more like one of the largest untapped energy reserves on Earth. And energy is only part of the story. Because the melting ice isn't just revealing resources, it's also opening something else. New shipping routes. Today, most global trade travels through long routes that pass through places like the Suez Canal or around the southern tip of Asia. But as the Arctic ice retreats, entirely new pathways are beginning to appear across the top of the world. Routes that could dramatically shorten the distance between Europe and Asia. For example, a ship traveling from Shanghai to Rotterdam normally has to travel more than 20,000 kilometers through the Indian Ocean and the Suez Canal. But through the Arctic, that journey could become nearly 40% shorter. For the global shipping industry, that means faster deliveries, lower fuel costs, and enormous economic advantages. And suddenly, the Arctic is no longer just a frozen frontier. It's becoming a strategic gateway for global trade. Which raises an important question. If the Arctic is opening, who will control it? If the Arctic is becoming one of the most important regions on Earth, then one country already has a major advantage. Russia. Geographically, Russia controls by far the largest Arctic coastline in the world. More than half of the Arctic Ocean borders Russian territory. And for decades, Russia has been preparing for the Arctic to become strategically important. In recent years, the country has dramatically expanded its military and economic presence in the region. Russia has reopened old Soviet military bases across the Arctic. It has built new airfields capable of hosting fighter jets. And it has deployed advanced radar systems designed to monitor the entire Arctic region. But Russia's strategy goes beyond military power. The country also controls the world's largest fleet of icebreaker ships. These specialized vessels are designed to cut through thick Arctic ice and escort cargo ships safely across frozen waters. Some of Russia's icebreakers are even powered by nuclear reactors, giving them the ability to operate for months without refueling. In other words, while much of the world is only beginning to think about the Arctic, Russia has already been preparing for it. But Russia is not the only country with interests in the Arctic. The United States also holds a strategic position through the state of Alaska. From a map perspective, Alaska sits directly across the Arctic Ocean from Russia. At some points, the two countries are separated by less than 90 kilometers of water. That proximity makes the Arctic extremely important for national security. During the Cold War, the Arctic served as a key region for monitoring missile launches and submarine movements between the United States and the Soviet Union. Today, those strategic concerns are returning. The U.S. military has been increasing its Arctic operations, conducting new training exercises designed to prepare troops for extreme polar conditions. American submarines regularly patrol under Arctic ice, and the Pentagon has begun investing in new Arctic strategies to counter growing Russian influence in the region. Because if the Arctic becomes a major shipping corridor and energy hub, the United States cannot afford to be left behind. Russia and the United States may dominate global headlines, but they are far from the only players in the Arctic. Canada controls vast northern territories that stretch deep into the Arctic Circle. Norway has long operated research stations and military facilities in the region, and Denmark, through its control of Greenland, holds a strategically important position between North America and Europe. Each of these countries is now investing more heavily in Arctic infrastructure, scientific research, and territorial claims, because as the ice retreats, control over the Arctic becomes more valuable. And then there is China. Unlike Russia or the United States, China does not border the Arctic Ocean. But that has not stopped Beijing from taking a growing interest in the region. In fact, China has declared itself a near-Arctic state. Over the past decade, China has invested heavily in Arctic research stations, icebreaker ships, and potential shipping routes. Some Chinese officials even described the emerging Arctic trade corridor as part of a new Polar Silk Road, a northern extension of China's massive global infrastructure strategy. And that raises a critical question. If so many powerful countries are moving into the Arctic, what happens when their interests collide? For centuries, global trade has depended on a few critical maritime routes. Ships traveling between Europe and Asia typically pass through the Suez Canal, connecting the Mediterranean Sea with the Indian Ocean. This route has shaped global commerce for decades. But it also comes with limitations. It is long, it is expensive, and it passes through narrow choke points that can easily disrupt global trade. Events like the Ever Given ship blockage in 2021, which halted global shipping through the Suez Canal for nearly a week, showed just how fragile these trade routes can be. But the Arctic offers an alternative. As the ice melts during summer months, ships can begin crossing directly across the top of the world, a route known as the Northern Sea Route. And this route could change global shipping forever. Because traveling through the Arctic can dramatically shorten the distance between major global ports. For example, a ship traveling from Shanghai to Rotterdam normally travels more than 20,000 kilometers. But through the Arctic, that journey could be reduced by nearly 40%. Less distance means less fuel, less time, and potentially billions of dollars in savings for the global shipping industry. Russia, more than any other country, is positioning itself to control this new Arctic corridor. The Northern Sea Route runs along Russia's vast Arctic coastline, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Over the past decade, Russia has invested heavily in developing this route. New Arctic ports are being built, navigation systems are being upgraded, and fleets of icebreaker ships are escorting cargo vessels through the icy waters. In fact, Russia has already begun charging international shipping companies fees to use the route. If Arctic shipping continues to expand, the Northern Sea Route could become one of the most important trade corridors in the world. And controlling that corridor would give Russia enormous economic and strategic influence. But Russia is not the only country thinking about Arctic shipping. Across the Arctic Ocean, Canada is also looking at its own potential trade route. Known as the Northwest Passage, this route runs through the maze of islands that make up Canada's Arctic archipelago. For centuries, explorers searched for a navigable path through these icy waters. Many expeditions failed. Some never returned. But today, as Arctic ice becomes thinner, parts of the Northwest Passage are becoming increasingly accessible during the summer months. Canada views this route as part of its national waters. But other countries, including the United States, see it as an international shipping lane. And that disagreement could become another point of tension in the future. If Arctic shipping continues to expand, the consequences could be enormous. Entire trade routes could shift northward. Ports in northern regions could become major hubs for global commerce, and the Arctic Ocean could transform from a frozen barrier into a central highway for international trade. But as economic opportunities grow, so do geopolitical tensions. Because when valuable territory opens up, powerful nations rarely agree on how it should be controlled. And that brings us to the biggest question of all. Could the Arctic become the next major arena of global competition? As the Arctic becomes more accessible, military activity in the region is also increasing. Russia has already established a network of Arctic bases stretching across its northern coastline. Some of these bases include radar systems, air defense installations, and airfields capable of hosting advanced fighter aircraft. The United States and its NATO allies have also begun expanding their Arctic operations. Military exercises are now regularly conducted in the region, training troops to operate in extreme polar conditions. Submarines patrol beneath the ice, surveillance systems monitor Arctic airspace, and governments are investing more resources into Arctic defense strategies. For now, most of these activities are described as precautionary, but the growing military presence shows that countries are preparing for a future where the Arctic plays a much larger strategic role. Despite these rising tensions, the Arctic has historically been a region of cooperation. Countries with Arctic territory participate in an international organization known as the Arctic Council. This council focuses on issues like environmental protection, scientific research, and sustainable development. For many years, the Arctic was seen as a place where countries could work together rather than compete. But as economic and strategic interests grow, maintaining that cooperation may become more difficult. Because the Arctic is not only about trade routes and energy, it is also about territory. Under international law, countries can claim parts of the Arctic seabed if they can prove that the underwater continental shelf extends from their territory. This has already triggered several overlapping territorial claims, and resolving those claims peacefully will require careful diplomacy. There is also another major concern. The Arctic is one of the most fragile ecosystems on Earth. Oil extraction, increased shipping traffic, and expanding industrial activity all carry environmental risks. An oil spill in Arctic waters could be extremely difficult to clean up, and increased human activity threatens wildlife that depends on the Arctic's delicate balance. At the same time, the melting ice that is opening the Arctic is also one of the most visible signs of global climate change. In other words, the same forces creating new opportunities in the Arctic are also raising serious environmental challenges. For centuries, the Arctic was seen as one of the most remote and inhospitable places on Earth, a frozen wilderness of ice, darkness, and silence. But today, that image is rapidly changing. As temperatures rise and the ice retreats due to climate change, the Arctic is revealing something the world has long suspected: enormous reserves of oil, natural gas, and valuable minerals hidden beneath the frozen seabed. What was once unreachable is now slowly becoming accessible. That is why powerful nations such as Russia, United States, Canada, Norway, and Denmark are increasing their presence in the region. New military bases, icebreakers, and strategic investments are transforming the Arctic into a space of growing geopolitical importance. At the same time, organizations like the Arctic Council continue to promote cooperation and peaceful dialogue among Arctic nations. But the question remains: can diplomacy keep pace with the rising competition? Because the Arctic is not just about resources, it is also about power, influence, and control over new global trade routes that could reshape the future of international commerce. So will the Arctic become the next battlefield of global rivalry? Or will it remain one of the last regions where nations choose cooperation over conflict? For now, the Arctic is still silent beneath its ice. But as that ice continues to melt, the decisions made today may determine whether this frozen frontier becomes a symbol of global cooperation or the stage for the next great geopolitical struggle.